My name is Isabella, and I am 41 years old. And if you had told me even 6 months ago that my entire life would collapse in one weekend, I would have laughed and brushed it off as impossible. I used to believe my world was stable. I used to believe my family stood with me. I used to believe that love and loyalty meant something. I was wrong, completely wrong. Because the moment I opened my front door that cold Saturday morning, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a suitcase in the other, I stepped into a nightmare that I did not create, but would soon have to survive. Before I take you into the moment, everything shattered. Let me know where you are watching from and settle in. You will want to hear how the life I trusted fell apart piece by piece. I had just returned from a week-long business trip across the country. I was exhausted but excited to be home. My husband Matthew always promised he would make my homecoming special. He would cook dinner, or light candles, or plan a quiet night where we could talk for hours. After 19 years together, we still kept little rituals like that. Or at least I thought we did. I remember turning the key in the lock that morning expecting to hear his footsteps rushing down the stairs. Instead, I stepped into silence. A strange, heavy silence that made my stomach tighten with unease. I called out his name, expecting him to appear with his familiar smile, but no answer came. The house felt wrong, still, cold, almost abandoned. Then I saw it. The first sign that my life was no longer the life I thought it was. A woman's perfume lingered in the entryway, sweet and floral, nothing like the scents I used. At first I brushed it off. Maybe a visitor, maybe someone from his office, maybe a harmless explanation. That is what I told myself as I walked deeper into the house. But every step made my chest tighter. Something was off. Deeply off. My mind told me to breathe. My heart told me to run. I headed toward the kitchen, and that is when the truth began to reveal itself. My husband's phone was buzzing over and over on the counter. He never left his phone unattended, ever. Messages popped up one after another. I did not recognize the number, but the previews were enough to make my hands start shaking uncontrollably. Words like "last night" and "I miss you" and "please talk to me" appeared one after another like blows to my chest. My vision blurred as I reached for the phone. I could barely breathe as I unlocked it, something he had always allowed because we had no secrets. Or so I believed. I scrolled through messages that shattered my world. I saw pictures, voice notes, words filled with intimacy that had nothing to do with me. I sank to the floor, the cold tiles pressing against my knees as I stared at the truth I never wanted to see. 19 years of marriage, 19 years of shared dreams, 19 years of sacrifice, and this is what I came home to. A woman who knew details about him that only I should have known. A timeline that stretched back farther than I dared to imagine. A betrayal that had been living inside my home long before I realized it. I do not know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe hours. Time stopped feeling real. All I knew was that the life I walked into that morning was not my life anymore. I felt something inside me crack quietly. A slow, painful breaking that did not stop. My breath trembled, my hands shook, and all I could think was why. Why, after everything we had built? Why, after all the obstacles we had survived? Why, after all the promises whispered in the dark? The silence around me grew heavier, almost suffocating. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My entire body tensed. I stood up slowly, fear and rage swirling together inside me. Part of me prayed it was Matthew alone. Another part feared it was not. As the steps approached the staircase, my pulse thundered in my ears. I felt like the ground beneath me was tilting. The air felt too thin, too sharp, too painful to breathe. When he finally appeared at the top of the stairs, everything about his expression told me he already knew he had been caught. He froze. I froze. The world froze around us. Both of us trapped in a moment that would change everything. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Behind him, something moved. A shadow, a silhouette. And in that split second, I felt the final piece of my heart fall apart. Before I continue, tell me in the comments if you have ever faced a betrayal that struck you so deeply that you questioned your own reality. and stay with me. Because what I discovered next was only the beginning of a much darker truth. Before the moment my world collapsed at the top of the staircase, before the perfume in the hallway, before the messages that ripped the air from my lungs, my life looked like something people envied from the outside. A steady marriage, a beautiful home, a comfortable career, routines that made me feel safe and connected. I had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. I had no reason to question the foundation of my life. But looking back, I can see the small cracks that once felt insignificant. I can see the moments I brushed off as stress or exhaustion. I can see how I convinced myself that everything was fine, because I believed deeply in the illusion of stability. Matthew and I met when I was 22, fresh out of college and starting my first job as a junior architect at a small firm in the city. He was 24, already climbing the ladder at a respected accounting company. I remember the night we met with incredible clarity. It was at a mutual friends gathering, one of those crowded living room parties where music was too loud and conversations overlapped into a warm, chaotic buzz. I was standing alone near the bookshelf, pretending to study the titles because I felt awkward. He walked up beside me, looked at the same shelf, and said something so simple, yet strangely charming. He said, "You can always tell who someone is based on what book they reach for." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the calm confidence in his voice. We talked for hours that night. We talked about books and childhood dreams and future plans. He had a way of listening that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Every detail of our conversation stayed with me. His laugh, his honesty, the way he leaned slightly forward when something mattered. By the end of the night, I felt something settle in my chest, something soft, something hopeful. He walked me to my car and asked if he could see me again. That was the beginning of everything. Our early years together were full of joy and discovery. We built routines without even trying. Morning coffee on the balcony, weekend trips to the farmer's market, Sunday afternoons watching documentaries we never finished because we always ended up talking too much. We were not perfect, but we felt perfect for each other. He supported my ambitions, and I supported his. We shared a dream of building a stable home, both of us raised in families where stability was rare. I grew up in a house filled with arguments and slammed doors. He grew up with cold silences and distance. Together, we wanted to do better. We married after 3 years of dating, a small ceremony near the ocean with soft waves crashing in the background and a sky that looked like it had been painted just for us. I remember the way his hands trembled when he held mine. I remember the way he whispered promises during our vows, even though a microphone was already amplifying his voice. We moved into our first apartment, a tiny space with creaky floors and peeling paint. But we loved it. We called it our training ground, the place where we learned to grow up together. As our careers progressed, life became busier. I worked long hours on architectural projects that stretched late into the night. He took on more responsibilities at his firm and eventually became a financial manager, a role that brought more pressure, but also more pride. Still, we found time for each other. At least, that is what I thought. We maintained our rituals, even when exhausted. He would pick me up from late meetings with my favorite takeout. I would leave little notes inside his briefcase when I knew he had a stressful week. Friends often told us we were one of the most balanced couples they knew. We communicated well. We laughed often. We trusted easily. Or at least, I trusted easily. Our home became a reflection of us. Warm, organized, filled with little reminders of the life we were building, pictures from vacations, souvenirs from anniversaries, the garden in the backyard that I tended every spring. We talked often about expanding our family, but timing never felt right. Careers, projects, financial goals. There was always something that made us say, soon. I believed there would always be time. I believed we had endless years ahead of us to make whatever life we wanted. Looking back now, I can see where I missed things. Small changes in his habits, new colognes he never mentioned buying, late meetings that became more frequent, sudden bursts of defensiveness when I asked simple questions. I always justified his behavior because I never imagined he would betray me. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he was tired. I told myself I was reading too much into it. When he pulled away emotionally, I filled the gaps with excuses instead of digging deeper. I trusted because trust felt easier than suspicion. I had no reason to believe he would deceive me. 19 years together creates a sense of inevitability, a belief that your partner would never allow someone else into the intimate spaces you share. But life has a way of revealing truths in layers. Before the collapse, my days had a gentle rhythm. I would wake up early, make coffee, read the news, and then head to the office to manage design teams working on new housing projects. I loved my job. I loved creating spaces where people felt safe. Spaces meant for families to grow. It is ironic now, considering my own home was slowly becoming a place where secrets grew instead. In the evenings, Matthew and I would talk about our days. At least, that is what I thought we were doing. I talked. He nodded. I shared my stresses and victories. He listened, but with a distance I now understand was guilt. At the time, I brushed it off as exhaustion. He had always been calm, quiet, reserved. I never realized the difference between quiet and absent until it was too late. Our weekends were usually peaceful. Grocery shopping in the morning, house cleaning in the afternoon, dinner with friends, or movie nights on the couch. We built a life that appeared stable, predictable, loving. People who saw us thought we were the definition of steady, and for a long time, I believed it too. My life before everything fell apart was full of routines that felt comforting, relationships that felt stable, and a marriage that felt unbreakable. That is why the betrayal shattered me so deeply. It did not just break my heart, it destroyed the foundation of the world I had built around him. But now that you understand the life I had, you will understand even more clearly how devastating it was when the truth began to surface. Because everything I trusted, everything I believed, everything I built with my own hands was about to be undone. And the first signs had already begun long before I recognized them. The first signs of betrayal never arrive loudly. They appear quietly, almost politely, as if trying not to disturb the peace you cling to. At the time, I did not understand what those signs meant. I brushed them aside with comforting explanations. Now, looking back, I realize every moment was a whisper of warning that I refused to hear. It started with small changes in Matthew's schedule. He used to come home around the same time every evening, always sending a message if he was running late. But about a year before everything collapsed, those patterns began to shift. A few late nights here and there, a few vague explanations that sounded rehearsed, meetings that stretched longer than usual. I asked him once if work was overwhelming him. He smiled, touched my hand, and said everything was fine. He said he was trying to earn a promotion. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Hard work had always been a part of our lives, so I did not question it. Then came the emotional distance. It was subtle at first. Conversations became shorter. His eyes wandered more often. He seemed distracted even during simple daily routines. At dinner, he would nod at my stories, but his responses felt delayed, as if his mind was somewhere else entirely. I remember lying in bed beside him one night, watching him scroll through his phone with a faint smile. When I asked what he was looking at, he turned the screen away slightly and said it was just a funny video from a coworker. I had no reason to doubt him, so I did not push. But the way he shielded the screen left an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. There were weekends when he claimed he needed to go into the office for special projects. He had never been the type to work weekends unless absolutely necessary. At first, I admired his dedication. I even packed him lunch, wanting to support him. But when I asked simple questions like what project he was working on, who was on his team, or why the deadlines were suddenly so tight, he grew tense and defensive. I told myself he was under pressure. I told myself that all careers go through chaotic phases. I ignored the instinct whispering that something was not right. Another sign came through his appearance. Matthew had never been overly concerned about grooming. He dressed neatly for work and kept himself clean, but he never put much effort into style. Around this time, he suddenly began wearing cologne again. He bought new shirts, new ties, even started styling his hair differently. I complimented him once, saying he looked handsome. He smiled, but his smile did not reach his eyes. That was the first time I saw a flicker of guilt cross his face. I noticed it, but I convinced myself I imagined it. There were nights when he came home smelling like a perfume I did not recognize. A sweet floral scent that lingered longer than it should have. When I asked about it gently, he laughed and said he had hugged a coworker who was celebrating her promotion. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that he would never betray me. So I forced myself to accept the explanation and pretended the uneasiness was nothing more than jealousy. My friends noticed the changes before I allowed myself to. One afternoon, my closest friend Lila and I went for coffee. She watched me carefully while stirring her drink. Eventually, she asked if everything was all right at home. I remember the tightness in my chest when she asked. She said that during our recent gatherings, Matthew seemed distant and distracted. She said his attention drifted whenever I spoke. I laughed it off and told her he was simply dealing with work stress, but her concern lingered with me long after the conversation ended. Then there were the calls Matthew refused to take near me. He would glance at the screen, mumble something about a client, and step outside or into another room. When he returned, he would always be slightly different, quiet, guarded. I tried asking him once who kept calling so frequently. His voice sharpened instantly, accusing me of being suspicious for no reason. That was the first time he snapped at me without provocation. I stood there stunned, unsure of what I had done wrong. Minutes later, he apologized and said he was overwhelmed. I hugged him, wanting to comfort him, unaware that the apology was a shield for a much darker truth. The intimacy between us began to fade as well. Touches felt less affectionate. Hugs grew shorter. He turned away more often at night. I felt him slipping away, yet I kept telling myself that every couple experiences periods of distance. I convinced myself that love evolves and softens over time. I never imagined that someone else could be taking the space that belonged to us. One of the clearest signs appeared just 2 months before I discovered everything. Matthew forgot our anniversary. He had never once forgotten it in 19 years. When I reminded him gently, he froze for a moment, then offered a rushed apology. He insisted he had been preoccupied at work, but the lack of sincerity in his voice stung in a way I had never felt before. I felt an ache in my heart that I could not explain. That night, for the first time, I cried quietly after he fell asleep. Something was changing. Something was slipping away. And deep down, I knew it. But the truth remained buried until the day I came home early, pulled by an instinct I could not explain. The signs had been there all along, subtle, quiet, persistent. I just did not want to see them, because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. And seeing it would mean admitting that the life I built was starting to crumble. Everything was leading me toward the moment when the truth would no longer hide. And soon, that moment would erupt in ways I never imagined. The breaking point arrived on a morning that should have felt ordinary. A morning like countless others where I returned home tired but grateful, expecting comfort and familiarity. Instead, I walked into a moment that tore my world in half. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can feel that moment in my chest like a physical blow. I still remember standing in the hallway with Matthew at the top of the stairs. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. His face looked drained of color. His posture stiffened with fear. His eyes darted between me and the space behind him. My breath grew shallow, every muscle in my body tightening with cold dread. I knew someone else was in the house. I knew he was not alone. The house felt too full, the air too heavy, as if it was holding its breath alongside me. Then it happened. A soft sound. The quiet shift of weight on a floorboard. A shadow moved behind him and stepped into view. My heart thudded so hard I thought I might collapse. A woman stood at the top of the staircase, wearing one of Matthew's shirts. My shirt. The faded blue button-up he always borrowed when he was cold. It hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves rolled carelessly past her wrists. Her hair was messy, her cheeks flushed, and her eyes widened the moment she saw me. Time fractured. I felt the world tilt, the walls bending inwards. My vision trembled as if my mind refused to accept the reality in front of me. The woman grabbed the railing, startled, but I could not hear whatever she said. The pounding in my ears drowned everything out. I looked at Matthew and saw a man I no longer recognized. His expression was trapped between guilt and panic. His lips parted, but no words formed. It was as if he had been exposed under a brutal spotlight, stripped of every lie he had wrapped himself in. I stepped back, my hand gripping the edge of the wall to steady myself. My voice cracked when I finally spoke. I asked him who she was. My question sounded small, almost childish, compared to the tidal wave of betrayal crashing inside me. He whispered her name, barely audible, as if saying it quietly would soften the blow. It did not. Nothing could. The woman stepped forward slightly, trying to speak, trying to offer some explanation or apology. The sound of her voice made my stomach turn. It was polite and gentle, as if she believed she had a place in my home, as if she believed she had a right to stand beside my husband in the space where he once promised to love me. I raised my hand instinctively, telling her not to come closer. She froze. Matthew reached for the railing, his face tight with panic, urging her to go back upstairs. She hesitated, then slowly retreated, disappearing into the room that used to be our guest room. The moment she vanished, the silence between us deepened into something unbearable. I looked at Matthew and demanded the truth. All of it. No more excuses. No more stories. No more false kindness used to cover the cracks. He finally spoke, his voice breaking. He admitted everything. Months of lies. Late nights that were not late nights. A relationship that had grown behind my back. He said it started during a time when he felt lonely. He said he did not know how to tell me. He said he never meant for things to go this far. Every word felt like a blade. He talked about feelings he should have shared with me, conversations he should have had with me, problems we could have solved together. Instead, he shared them with someone else. Someone who now stood in my home wearing my clothes while I stood there trying not to fall apart. I remember shaking my head, saying over and over that I did not understand. I asked him why. I asked him what I had done wrong. His answer shattered what was left of my heart. He said it was not about me. That sentence felt like a cruel joke, because everything about the damage he caused would change my life forever. My eyes blurred as I stumbled backward until my back touched the wall. I felt small and broken and entirely unprepared for the truth now unraveling in front of me. Matthew reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped away. The thought of his hand on my skin made me recoil. I could not breathe. I could not think. For the first time in 19 years, I saw him not as my partner, not as the man I built a life with, but as a stranger capable of breaking every promise he ever made. That moment was the exact second my old life died, and everything that came after would be shaped by the ruins left behind. The hours after the breaking point felt unreal. I walked out of the house without knowing where I was going, without grabbing my purse or coat, without a plan. I just needed air. I needed space wide enough to hold the weight of what I had seen. The betrayal kept replaying in my mind again and again, like a cruel loop that refused to stop. His face, her face, my shirt draped over her body. Reality had cracked open, and everything inside me demanded answers. I did not sleep that night. I stayed in a small hotel room because I could not bear the thought of going back home. The silence was overwhelming. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hands, scrolling through Matthew's messages, rereading the words that had started all of this. Every message felt like a new injury. The more I read, the more I realized the messages went back farther than I believed. Weeks turned into months. Sweet words, plans, excuses, photos, little conversations that had nothing to do with me. Around 3 a.m, I finally broke down. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. I kept whispering questions to the empty room. How long had this been happening? Who else knew? Why did he let me believe everything was fine? Did he ever intend to tell me? And most painful of all, did he ever love me the way he claimed to? When morning came, I knew I could not stay in that room forever. I needed clarity. I needed facts, not just fragments. And deep inside, another truth had started to take shape. If he could lie so smoothly, if he could hide another woman inside our home, then there had to be more lies waiting beneath the surface. Betrayal does not grow from one seed. It grows from a pattern. I started by calling Lila. She was shocked when she heard what happened. Her voice trembled with anger as she told me she had sensed something was wrong for months, but did not want to intrude. She asked if I wanted company. I said yes. She arrived within 30 minutes with coffee and a notebook. She always had a calm, analytical mind when I needed it most. She sat beside me and said something simple, yet powerful. "We are going to figure out everything, one step at a time." Her words anchored me. The first step was to understand the hidden timeline. I reopened Matthew's messages, this time with a clear goal. I scrolled back as far as possible. My stomach twisted as I read the earliest messages between them. Flirty exchanges disguised as jokes. Conversations that grew more intimate. Plans made on nights he had told me he was working late. It was all there in black and white. I wrote down dates, times, and repeated patterns. The truth unfolded whether I wanted it to or not. Then came another discovery. Photos he had hidden in a private folder. They were not explicit, but they were intimate. Something inside me cracked again. I felt the air leave my lungs. Lila put her hand on my back and told me to breathe. After documenting everything, I realized I needed more information. I needed to know if this was only emotional betrayal or if it had become something larger, something financial, or long-term. Affairs rarely stay contained. They spread into every corner of a life. I logged into our shared financial accounts. At first, everything looked normal. Bills, mortgage, groceries. But then I noticed small transfers to an account I did not recognize. Repeated transfers. Consistent amounts. My heart pounded as I cross-checked them with the dates from their messages. They lined up almost perfectly. He was supporting her. He was providing for her secretly. My hands shook as I opened our credit card statements. That was when another wave hit me. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, purchases at boutiques I had never been to, all hidden under vague category labels. The betrayal was not emotional. It was not accidental. It was deliberate, planned, and funded. I called my sister next. We were not incredibly close, but she supported me through difficult times before. When I told her what happened, she gasped and asked if she should come over. I said no. I needed to stay focused. She asked if I had confronted him fully. I said not yet. I did not want to confront him with half the truth when the whole truth was waiting to be discovered. After hours of digging, I realized there was still more I needed to know. Who was this woman? How did they meet? How deep did this go? Did anyone in his family know? Did anyone at his office notice? I considered calling his firm, but stopped myself. I needed to think strategically. For the first time in my life, I contacted a private investigator. It felt strange to say the words out loud. I told him I needed to understand the full extent of my husband's secret life. The investigator asked questions about the woman's appearance, name, and anything else I had found. I gave him everything, every detail, every message, every expense. He told me he would get back to me within a few days. Those days felt like years. During that time, I contacted a lawyer as well, not because I wanted revenge in that moment, but because I needed protection. Betrayal does not end with heartbreak. It can become financial ruin, emotional manipulation, or legal entanglement if you are not careful. The lawyer listened calmly, asked for documents, and outlined my options. His voice was steady and reassuring. He told me it was good that I came early. He told me that betrayal this deep often comes with more consequences than people initially see. He was right. 2 days later, the private investigator called. His voice was firm, almost hesitant. He had discovered far more than I expected. The woman was not just a coworker. She was someone Matthew had been involved with before, someone he had reconnected with through social media, someone he had met in secret, long before the messages began. Their relationship had roots that stretched back years, hidden underneath the surface of my marriage. My mouth went dry. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear his next words. He revealed details that made my stomach twist. Dates, locations, lies told through simple sentences. Moments I thought Matthew was working late when he was actually living another life. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the wall in front of me. The truth was deeper than betrayal. The truth was a double life unfolding beneath my feet. And now that I finally saw the full picture, one thing became clear. It was time to confront the past I never knew existed. And the confrontation would not be simple. It would tear open everything that had been hidden from me. The real reckoning was about to begin. Before I could confront Matthew with the full truth, I needed to understand the deeper wound beneath the betrayal. Betrayal does not break you only because of the present moment. It breaks you because it reaches into the past and drags old pain back to the surface. As I sat alone in the hotel room after receiving the investigator's report, memories resurfaced with startling clarity. Memories I had pushed aside, Memories I had minimized. Memories that revealed just how long I had been conditioned to excuse the unacceptable. I grew up in a house where silence was louder than shouting. My parents rarely fought openly, but they wounded each other through distance and withdrawal. My mother was emotionally absent. My father was physically present but overwhelmed by stress. As a child, I learned to adapt. I learned to fill emotional voids with understanding. I learned to accept crumbs because they were better than nothing. I learned that love meant staying even when it hurt. I did not realize how deeply those early lessons shaped me until I met Matthew at 22. He was gentle, calm, consistent. Everything my home had never been. I saw stability in him. I saw someone who listened, someone who paid attention, someone who promised to be there. I clung to that stability like a lifeline. I built my world around it. Around him. Without meaning to, I made him the anchor for all the emotional storms I had carried from childhood. Our early years together were filled with what felt like safety. But now, revisiting those memories, I remember moments I ignored. The first was 5 months into our relationship when he forgot my birthday. He called that night, apologizing, saying he was preoccupied with a deadline at work. I forgave him instantly. I even comforted him, reassuring him that I understood. I told myself it was a simple mistake, but looking back, it was a sign of something deeper. A pattern I was already too familiar with. The pattern of making myself smaller so someone else could feel comfortable. Another memory surfaced from our 4th year together. I found a message on his phone from a coworker who seemed unusually close, a joking message that felt too intimate. When I asked him about it, he became defensive. He said I was overreacting. He raised his voice, and I immediately backed down. I apologized for looking at his phone. I reassured him that I trusted him. I erased the discomfort in my chest and moved on. I told myself trust meant not questioning every little thing. But trust is not the same as blindness. The more I replayed these memories, the more I saw how I had been trained by my own past to tolerate emotional distance. I had learned to ignore small signs because acknowledging them felt too painful. I had learned to be understanding, even at the cost of my own needs. I had learned to make excuses for people who hurt me because confronting the truth felt dangerous. I remembered the time Matthew traveled for work during our 9th year of marriage. He came back with a new cologne I had never seen before. When I asked where he bought it, he said a colleague recommended it. I believed him. But now, with the truth in my hands, I wondered if that trip had been something else entirely. I wondered how many moments like that slipped past me while I was busy keeping our home functioning, while I was busy believing in us. There was another memory that hit me like a heavy blow, our 12th anniversary. I planned a weekend getaway to a small lakeside cabin. I spent weeks organizing everything. Matthew arrived exhausted and withdrawn. He spent most of the weekend answering emails. I cried quietly one night, feeling ignored and unimportant. He hugged me and said he was sorry. He said he did not realize he was being distant. I forgave him instantly. I convinced myself he was overwhelmed by work. But now, years later, I see how that weekend foreshadowed everything that would unfold. As the memories collided with the present truth, I realized something painful but necessary. The betrayal did not begin with the woman in my home. It began long before. It began in the moments I taught myself to accept less. It began in the moments I silenced my own discomfort. It began in the moments I convinced myself that love meant patience, endurance, and endless understanding. Sitting alone, surrounded by evidence of Matthew's double life, I understood that confronting him would not just be about the affair. It would be about confronting the part of myself that tolerated quiet abandonment for years. This was not just a reckoning with his lies. It was a reckoning with my own history. The child inside me who learned to accept emotional scraps deserved more. The woman I had become deserved more. And as painful as it was to face everything at once, I felt something shift inside me. A slow awakening. A painful clarity. I was finally ready to stop avoiding the truth. And that meant one thing. The confrontation was no longer a choice. It was unavoidable. The day I confronted Matthew arrived with a heaviness I could feel in my bones. The sky was overcast, the air thick with the promise of rain. It felt fitting. My world had already begun to unravel, and the weather simply mirrored the storm inside me. I sat in my car across from our house for nearly 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, breathing slowly, preparing myself. I repeated one thing in my mind. No more excuses. No more minimizing. No more pretending. Today, the truth would be spoken out loud. When I finally stepped out of the car, my legs shook slightly, but my determination felt stronger than the fear pulsing through me. I walked up the pathway, opened the front door, and entered the house that no longer felt like home. Matthew was sitting at the dining table, elbows resting on the surface, hands clasped together. He looked tired, almost defeated. He had been waiting for me. Maybe he sensed that everything had shifted. Maybe he knew there was no more hiding. He stood up quickly when he saw me. His voice trembled when he said my name. I held up a hand to stop him. I did not want apologies. Apologies were the cheapest currency in a broken relationship. I wanted truth. All of it. I sat down across from him and told him everything I had learned. His face paled the moment I mentioned the private investigator. His fingers twitched. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Fear of being fully seen. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control of the narrative he had carefully constructed. I asked him how long it had been going on. Not the version he told himself to feel better. The real version. The one buried beneath the excuses. He hesitated, then finally answered. Longer than I imagined. Longer than he ever admitted to himself. Years of messages. Months of meetings. Countless moments stolen from our marriage. Hearing that truth felt like being hit with cold water. Sharp, breath-stealing, devastating. But I held his gaze. I refused to look away. I placed the printed messages on the table. I placed the bank statements beside them, the hotel receipts, the photographs, the timeline I had spent hours creating. He looked at everything with a mixture of shame and panic, his hands trembling slightly. He kept whispering that he never meant for things to go so far, that he never wanted to hurt me. But intentions do not erase actions. Intentions do not rebuild trust. Intentions do not undo years of lies. I asked him why he let me believe everything was fine. Why he hugged me at night knowing he was sharing intimacy with someone else. Why he let me plan future trips while building a secret life behind my back. His answers were fragments of regret, excuses held together with fear. He said he felt lonely. He said he felt misunderstood. He said he thought he could keep everything separate. Each excuse felt like a deeper insult. Instead of remorse, all I heard was self-preservation. When I asked him if he loved her, he froze. The silence stretched long enough to confirm what he refused to say. I felt something inside me dissolve quietly, like a final thread snapping. Love does not require words. Silence can be an answer too. Then I asked the question I feared most. Did anyone else know? Had his family known? Had his coworkers suspected? Had I been the only one living blind inside a story that everyone else could see? His eyes dropped to the table. That was all the confirmation I needed. Betrayal is not always private. Sometimes it becomes a quiet secret shared behind your back while people smile to your face. My breath shook, but I stayed composed. I had every fact, every piece of evidence, every timeline, and I refused to let him twist the narrative or minimize his actions. He tried to reach for my hand. The gesture made my skin crawl. I pulled back. The distance between us felt enormous, and yet he was sitting right in front of me. For a moment, the room fell into complete silence. Just the sound of our breathing and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, I told him something he did not expect. I told him that this confrontation was not about saving our marriage. It was about reclaiming my own dignity. It was about taking back the pieces of myself I had handed over to someone who did not value them. It was about facing the truth without flinching. His face crumpled. He apologized again. He begged to explain. He begged for time. He begged for forgiveness. But his tears did not move me the way they once might have. Betrayal changes you. It reshapes the way you understand love. It hardens certain places inside you. It awakens parts of you that refuse to settle for pain disguised as loyalty. I stood up slowly, gathering the documents. He asked where I was going. I answered simply. I was going somewhere he could no longer follow, somewhere he no longer had the privilege to enter. I told him that healing would not come from staying. Healing would come from stepping away from everything that hurt me. As I walked toward the door, he called my name one last time. I paused but did not turn around. I needed that moment of silence, that moment of clarity, that moment of separation. Then I stepped out of the house. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. Walking away from Matthew that day did not bring immediate peace. It brought a wave of consequences that spread into every corner of my life. Grief, anger, fear, relief, confusion, strength. All of it collided inside me like a storm with no center. There is a strange silence that settles over you when the person you trusted most becomes the person who hurt you the deepest. That silence followed me everywhere in the days that came after. I moved into a small rental apartment the same week. It was nothing like our home. No framed photos on the wall, no familiar scent of candles, no warm light reflecting off polished floors. Just plain walls and empty rooms. But the emptiness felt honest, and honesty was something I had lived without for far too long. I spent my first night sitting on the floor with a single suitcase beside me, staring at the bare ceiling. It felt like both a burial and a beginning. Meanwhile, Matthew spiraled. He called dozens of times. He sent long messages pleading for another chance. Apologies, confessions, moments of panic and desperation. He said he could not sleep. He said he could not eat. He said he did not deserve forgiveness but hoped for it anyway. I read every message with a steady heart. Not cold, not vindictive, just done. Something inside me had closed itself off, not out of spite, but out of survival. The lawyer meetings began immediately. Sitting across the table from a stranger while describing every detail of my marriage felt surreal. I brought every document, every message, every financial record. My lawyer listened carefully, asked precise questions, and mapped out my options. He explained what separation meant legally. He explained asset division. He explained the possibility of spousal support. I listened with calm detachment. It was strange to speak about a life I was still grieving, as if it were a business arrangement. But that is what betrayal does. It forces you to evaluate the practical aftermath, even as your heart aches. There were financial consequences I had never anticipated. Matthew's secret transfers, the hotel bills, and the support he had been giving the other woman had drained more from our savings than I realized. I felt foolish for not seeing it earlier, but my lawyer reminded me that trust is not a weakness. It is something you give freely until someone proves they cannot hold it. His family became involved soon after. His mother called me crying. She said she had no idea what he had done. She said she loved me like a daughter. She begged me not to leave him. Hearing her voice brought back 19 years of memories, but I stayed firm. Love from his family did not erase the damage he caused. My well-being could not depend on their sadness. His sister reached out too. Her voice was softer, steadier. She apologized on his behalf and told me she understood if I never wanted contact again. She admitted she had noticed changes in Matthew, but never imagined the truth. She offered help if I needed anything. That small kindness meant more than she knew. Not everyone would be cruel in this fallout. Some people would show grace even in the wreckage. Emotionally, I went through stages that shifted unpredictably. One morning, I woke up feeling strong and clear. The next morning, I crumbled while pouring coffee because the smell reminded me of our Sunday mornings together. Healing is not linear. Some days felt like 3 steps forward. Some days felt like falling backward into the same darkness. But every day I kept moving. I started therapy, something I had postponed for years. My therapist helped me untangle the silent wounds from childhood that had allowed me to excuse so much. She helped me understand my patterns. She helped me see that the betrayal was not a reflection of my worth, but of Matthew E.'s emptiness. She said something that stayed with me. She said, "You carried the weight of the marriage alone for a long time. You did not fail. You were abandoned long before the truth revealed itself." Work became a refuge. My colleagues noticed the subtle change in me, but respected my privacy. I threw myself into projects, finding meaning in design and structure, things that made sense when emotions did not. Creating safe spaces for others felt therapeutic in a poetic way. I had lost my sense of home, but I could build homes for others. Matthew continued to reach out, but the tone of his messages shifted. The pleas became quiet, then apologetic, then resigned. He asked if we could meet one last time. I said no. Meeting him again would only reopen wounds that were finally beginning to strengthen. His final message was simple. He said he would always regret losing me. I believed that. But regret does not rebuild trust. Slowly, my life found a new rhythm. Mornings were quieter, but no longer heavy. Nights were lonelier, but no longer confusing. The apartment walls began to fill with small pieces of myself. A plant near the window, a framed photo from my childhood, books stacked on the nightstand, gentle steps toward rebuilding a life that belonged to me alone. The consequences of betrayal are not only emotional. They shape your routines, your relationships, your finances, your identity. But consequences can also transform you. They can push you into clarity. They can ignite truth. They can reveal strength you did not know you had. The aftermath hurt. It changed me. But it also began something new. And as the pieces slowly settled, I realized the most important part was still ahead. The transformation, the return to myself, the beginning of a life rebuilt on truth. The months following the aftermath became a journey I never asked for, yet one I eventually learned to embrace. Transformation is rarely gentle. It scrapes you raw, exposes every fragile part of you, and leaves you standing in front of a mirror, wondering who you really are once the weight of another person's lies is removed from your shoulders. For a long time, I believed I was broken. But slowly, as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, something inside me shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, gradually, honestly. Healing did not begin with forgiveness. It began with facing myself. For the first time in years, I asked questions I had avoided. What did I want for myself? What made me feel alive? What parts of my identity had I buried under compromise? I realized I had spent so much of my life shaping myself around Matthew, around the idea of our marriage, around the need to maintain peace, that I had forgotten the woman I was before him. Rediscovering her felt like digging through old layers of dust and finding a spark still glowing underneath. I started journaling every morning, pouring out fears, anger, memories, and hopes. At first, the pages were heavy with grief. Slowly, the words changed. I wrote about things I wanted to try, places I wanted to visit, dreams I had set aside. The act of writing became a quiet promise to myself that I was worth listening to. Therapy became a sanctuary. My therapist guided me through the tangled roots of my past, helping me see patterns I had never recognized. She showed me how my childhood had taught me to minimize my needs, how I learned to accept emotional scraps as love, how I often silenced myself to avoid conflict. She encouraged me to rebuild not just my heart, but my boundaries. She reminded me that love without respect is not love at all. And slowly I began to understand that betrayal did not define me. It freed me from a life that had asked too much of me while giving too little in return. I returned to things that once brought me joy. Gardening, for instance. I bought a few small plants for my apartment balcony. Tending to them became symbolic. New roots, new growth, new beginnings. Watching them flourish under my care reminded me that I too was capable of blooming again. Work became more than a distraction. It became an outlet for creativity. I took on projects that challenged me, designs that inspired me, clients who valued my vision. I noticed a confidence growing within me, one I had not felt in years, a confidence that did not depend on Matthew or any external validation, a confidence that came from surviving something that almost broke me. I also rebuilt friendships. I allowed people to show up for me in ways I had always been too proud or too afraid to accept. Dinner with Lila, weekend walks with my sister, quiet conversations with coworkers who offered genuine support. Each moment chipped away at the belief that I had to carry everything alone. Then came the day I realized I no longer felt the sting when Matthew crossed my mind. I no longer replayed the betrayal. I no longer questioned my worth. Instead, I saw the truth clearly. His choices were about him, not me. His emptiness created the cracks, not my shortcomings. Recognizing that gave me a freedom I had never known, a freedom to define my life on my own terms. The most profound transformation happened internally. I learned to trust myself again, my instincts, my voice, my boundaries. I learned that I deserved loyalty, honesty, and presence, not the diluted, conditional version I had accepted for so long. I learned that love should never require you to shrink yourself. One evening, months later, I stood on my balcony at sunset, watching the sky fill with soft colors. The air was warm, gentle. The plants I had nurtured swayed slightly in the breeze. I felt peace settle over me. Not the forced peace I used to create in my marriage. Real peace. The kind that comes from choosing yourself without guilt. I no longer felt like the woman who walked out of her home shattered and betrayed. I felt like someone new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone whole. Transformation does not erase the past. It reshapes it. It turns pain into clarity, loss into direction, endings into beginnings. And as I stood there watching the sky, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally found myself again, and I would never lose her for anyone. The months following the aftermath became a journey I never asked for, yet one I eventually learned to embrace. Transformation is rarely gentle. It scrapes you raw, exposes every fragile part of you, and leaves you standing in front of a mirror, wondering who you really are once the weight of another person, as lies, is removed from your shoulders. For a long time, I believed I was broken, but slowly, as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, something inside me shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, gradually, honestly. Healing did not begin with forgiveness. It began with facing myself. For the first time in years, I asked questions I had avoided. What did I want for myself? What made me feel alive? What parts of my identity had I buried under compromise? I realized I had spent so much of my life shaping myself around Matthew, around the idea of our marriage, around the need to maintain peace, that I had forgotten the woman I was before him. Rediscovering her felt like digging through old layers of dust and finding a spark still glowing underneath. I started journaling every morning, pouring out fears, anger, memories, and hopes. At first, the pages were heavy with grief. Slowly, the words changed. I wrote about things I wanted to try, places I wanted to visit, dreams I had set aside. The act of writing became a quiet promise to myself that I was worth listening to. Therapy became a sanctuary. My therapist guided me through the tangled roots of my past, helping me see patterns I had never recognized. She showed me how my childhood had taught me to minimize my needs, how I learned to accept emotional scraps as love, how I often silenced myself to avoid conflict. She encouraged me to rebuild not just my heart, but my boundaries. She reminded me that love without respect is not love at all. And slowly, I began to understand that betrayal did not define me. It freed me from a life that had asked too much of me while giving too little in return. I returned to things that once brought me joy. Gardening, for instance. I bought a few small plants for my apartment balcony. Tending to them became symbolic. New roots, new growth, new beginnings. Watching them flourish under my care reminded me that I, too, was capable of blooming again. Work became more than a distraction. It became an outlet for creativity. I took on projects that challenged me, designs that inspired me, clients who valued my vision. I noticed a confidence growing within me, one I had not felt in years. A confidence that did not depend on Matthew or any external validation. A confidence that came from surviving something that almost broke me. I also rebuilt friendships. I allowed people to show up for me in ways I had always been too proud or too afraid to accept. Dinner with Lila, weekend walks with my sister, quiet conversations with coworkers who offered genuine support. Each moment chipped away at the belief that I had to carry everything alone. Then came the day I realized I no longer felt the sting when Matthew crossed my mind. I no longer replayed the betrayal. I no longer questioned my worth. Instead, I saw the truth clearly. His choices were about him, not me. His emptiness created the cracks, not my shortcomings. Recognizing that gave me a freedom I had never known. a freedom to define my life on my own terms. The most profound transformation happened internally. I learned to trust myself again, my instincts, my voice, my boundaries. I learned that I deserved loyalty, honesty, and presence. Not the diluted, conditional version I had accepted for so long. I learned that love should never require you to shrink yourself. One evening, months later, I stood on my balcony at sunset, watching the sky fill with soft colors. The air was warm, gentle. The plants I had nurtured swayed slightly in the breeze. I felt peace settle over me, not the forced peace I used to create in my marriage. Real peace, the kind that comes from choosing yourself without guilt. I no longer felt like the woman who walked out of her home shattered and betrayed. I felt like someone new, someone stronger, someone wiser, someone whole. Transformation does not erase the past. It reshapes it. It turns pain into clarity, loss into direction, endings into beginnings. And as I stood there watching the sky, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally found myself again, and I would never lose her for anyone.